On the heels of the Har Sinai experience, the Jewish people receive a large collection of civil law, criminal law, economic law in Parshat Mishpatim. Among this collection, one particular economic law that we're familiar with is the prohibition of charging interest in the context of a loan. The Torah says, Im kesef talveh et ami, if you should loan another person money, lo tasimun alav neshech, then you should not be charging interest to that individual. I want to pose a question on this prohibition, which is, why is it wrong to charge interest? The economist Adam Smith argued that interest as an entity is amoral in the sense that it is simply a fee for service. The ability to have access to capital is something that's valuable, that should be paid for. Why is that something that the Torah prohibits? I think that if we dig a little bit deeper into the pasuk that I just quoted, then we will have a potential direction to go in, but I'm going to leave us off with a question at the end. So when I read the pasuk to you just a moment ago, I actually skipped over a phrase. And that phrase was, Im kesef talveh et ami, that's what I read, et ha'ani imach, with regards to the poor among you, you should not be lending to them. Lo tieh lo ke'nosheh, you should not be like a collector. And then, concluding with lo tasimun alav neshech, you should not place interest upon that individual. I think that middle section of the pasuk is critical for understanding the moral reasoning of the Torah to prohibit interest. That has to do with the recipient, the ani. The ani is a person who is financially struggling, and they are seeking some sort of upward mobility, some way to get on their own 2 feet. And the prohibition is specifically to act in a way that is ke'nosheh. Rashi says that this is acting in a domineering way to somebody who is vulnerable, exploiting somebody by charging large interest just because you can, ultimately because you want to benefit and profit from somebody else's position and their misfortune. And so a lot of the moral problem with charging interest, I think, has to do with A, the disempowered position of the recipient, and secondly, with the attitude of the lender. If one is going to behave in a controlling and cruel fashion, then that's where the prohibition against interest lies. The problem with that understanding of neshech, of the prohibition of interest, is that Chazal don't make a distinction between the rich and the poor. Ein chiluk bein ani la'ashir. Regardless of what kind of Jew you are having a loan arrangement with, it's still prohibited to charge interest. If the moral rationale had to do with profiting from somebody else's misfortune, then one could argue that if the lender is fully agreeable to the interest and that they are not in a vulnerable position, then it should be allowed. But that's not the case. And even in a business dealing between 2 equal parties on equal financial plane, if it's between 2 Jews, the Torah prohibition of interest still applies. So my question that I'm going to leave you with is why? What would be the challenge with lending somebody money with interest if it's something that they want and they're not in a vulnerable position? Could it be that the Torah sees the entire entity of lending as a form of charity, and if one is allowed to make exceptions to that, then it would endanger the entire enterprise. If that was the case, then the entire workaround of the Heter Iska, which enables Jews to borrow from other Jews with paying interest, would seem to be a problem. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this question in Shul about the ethics of lending with interest and what's really behind the Torah prohibition on doing so. See you in Shul.